In this video, we are going to be looking at an exemplar lab report for chemistry and walking through each individual section on its own so that you can get an idea of what a finished lab report might look like. Now on our first page, this page is our title page, page 1. So you'll notice there is a title for the lab report that is centered and in the middle of the page. That's pretty common convention for lab reports, center your titles. You'll also notice with this title, it says experimentally calculating the molar concentration of NaOH through titrations. So you'll notice that that title is descriptive. It explains to the reader what the actual purpose and method behind the experiment was. It's very clear when you read this what the people performing the investigation were doing. Because it's so descriptive, it's a good example of a lab report title. Examples of titles you should avoid would be things like titrations lab report, or chemical reactions lab report, or chemistry lab report. Anything that is not descriptive and doesn't completely explain the overall purpose of the investigation is a title that you should avoid. So keep that in mind. We like titles to be very descriptive and give good detail without explaining every single step, but clearly explaining the purpose. In the bottom right corner, you'll see some descriptive information such as name, course, teacher, and date submitted. Now, I don't know if anyone's a fan of Fluffy, Gabe Iglesias, or you've watched any of his stand-up specials, but we're pretending that he's a student in my class. So if this were his lab report, his name would be here, SCH3UV Section 1, that's our course. Of course, Mr. Privatera, I am your teacher, and then you would write the date that you submitted the report. Not the date that you started the report and not the date that you would like to have submitted the report, the date you submitted the report and that it actually was turned in. Please and thank you. Now that's our title page. You'll see on the second page we have a section on the introduction. The introduction section is where you give some theory or some background information to give the reader some context as to why you're seeing what you're seeing, why your hypothesis might be what your hypothesis is, just so that anyone who may not have the same level of background knowledge as you could read this report and still understand what's happening. So you'll see there that could be achieved sometimes in as little as 1 to 2 sentences. Now in the purpose section, that's where you explain very clearly why you're doing the investigation. Why are you performing this experiment? What is the purpose behind it? What's your reasoning for doing this? That also can be achieved in as little as 1 to 2 sentences. You'll see a materials section where all the materials are clearly listed. Now I've listed them just as lists there. Some people like to do materials as bullet point lists or numbered lists. It's usually a matter of personal preference. You'll see a procedure. That's just where there is a numbered list of all the steps that were needed to carry out the investigation. A good rule of thumb with the procedure section is that somebody else who has never watched the investigation, never performed the lab or the experiment, is not even part of the class. The procedure should be detailed enough so that they could pick up your report and then repeat the experiment on their own with no other instructions. So that's how we want to do our procedure. You'll also notice here that all of these different sections are clearly differentiated through bold text and underlined, so it's very clear what information belongs to which section. Now see in the results section, that's where you communicate what you actually determined in your experiment and what your investigation shows. What data did you collect? You'll see in this exemplar report there's a table. Now the table, it's not always going to be a table. Sometimes it will be a figure, sometimes it will be a graph. What you do need to keep in mind though is that regardless of what it is, tables, graphs, and figures should always be numbered as they are here. and you'll see that we also have a descriptive title for our table or for your figure or graph. This because we want to be as clear as possible to the reader. Someone may not necessarily know why this table is here or what it's supposed to show, but adding the descriptive sentence next to the number of your figure or table really clears that up. It's always good practice to number your tables and graphs and figures, because then, say you're doing a discussion section where you need to analyze your results, you can always then easily refer the reader back to, as indicated in table number 2, as shown in figure number 2, and then it's very easy for someone to go back and understand your report. Now our final section is the conclusion. This is just where you are basically restating the overall result of your experiment and then linking it back to the purpose. So the purpose of this lab was determine the concentration of a base by titrating an acid of known concentration and volume. And the conclusion was approximately 32.7 milliliters of hydrochloric acid was required to neutralize 10 milliliters of sodium hydroxide. And then it also tells you the molarity. So those pieces of data directly relate to the purpose. And that's how you know that this is an exemplar conclusion section. Now lastly, the questions. If you're ever assigned analysis questions to do as part of your lab, those should usually go at the end. A good thing to do as well is to make sure the questions themselves are clearly indicated in your lab to make things easier on myself. Please and thank you as the marker. So the questions themselves are clearly indicated, and then you'll also see the answers are given and they're full answers. So full sentences at the university level in science, that is what we'll expect for level 4 exemplar work. You'll also notice that if you have a lab report that ever requires calculations, you're going to see that for this question, a full solution is given. So a reaction equation is given, all variables are clearly defined, the number of steps being taken is clearly indicated as well. The correct formula has been used, all the algebra has been shown wherever needed, and then a final therefore statement is given. That's how you can know that you're on the right track to level 4 on labs. And we see the same thing for the other question. So to recap, we have a descriptive title that's not just something lab report. It's centered. The text is centered on the page, and it's also in the middle of the title page. You have descriptive information in the bottom right corner. All sections are clearly differentiated and labeled so that the reader can know what they are. The lab report is organized, and it is complete with full answers given for all analysis questions. Now, of course, there are ways that you could improve upon this lab report even further. I won't necessarily spend more time in this video on that, but just know there are things you could change about this to make it a level 4+. Something that you will all do well to keep in mind is just realize that this exemplar and all of these sections, this is a complete full report. If you're asked to do a report with every section, oftentimes this will not be the case, and you'll be asked for only a few sections. So in those instances, please make sure you carefully read the instructions to the assignment, review the checklist, and only include what's needed. You'll save yourself a lot of time by following those checklists very carefully, making sure that you include only what's needed and not doing sections that are not meant to go on the report.